Hi there. Hello. Jackie here. Welcome to a new Kings and Generals video. Yep, we're back here again, and I was like scrolling through YouTube, and then I just noticed Rome versus Persia, an unwinnable war, posted 21 hours ago. It already has 76,000 views. That's crazy. But yeah, really great channel. I mean, they covered all kinds of history, modern, medieval, ancient, contemporary. Like, let's just watch this. I really like the thumbnail, so let's just do this. Anyways, okay, so hold on, let me just do that. Okay, let me do a preemptive like, and let's do this.
The historic rivalry between
Okay, before we begin, I want to say the original video is in the pinned comment and the description box, so go check it out. If you're interested, actually, just before you watch my reaction, go like their video and watch their video, because I'm pretty sure my reaction is going to hinder the video's quality. So yeah, but afterwards, come back to my channel and subscribe and like. Thank you very much.
the Roman Empire and the various iterations of the Iranian empires is one of the most bitter, bloody, and enduring feuds in world history.
Yep.
Spanning over nearly 700 years,
Starting with the Parthian Empire and the Republic, ending with the medieval Roman Empire and the Sassanid Empire.
spectacularly brutal battles of Carrhae, Rhandaea, and Ctesiphon are just a few of the long list of conflicts between Rome and Persia over nearly 3 centuries.
Yep.
But why did great Roman leaders like Crassus or Antony fail to conquer Persia, where Alexander the Great and his Macedonian phalanxes had succeeded in previous centuries?
Simple. Because of leadership. Not saying Crassus and Antony are bad leaders, bad military leaders. Obviously, not on the same level as Alexander, obviously. But Antonius and Crassus simply were fighting against Persian leaders who were way better than Darius III. You have to keep that in mind, by the way. Like, the only reason I'm pretty sure the Persians lost against Alexandros, was because Darius III was super incompetent and was a coward. That's why.
In this episode, we'll delve into the geopolitical and socio-economic circumstances that shaped this long frontier, and why Rome and Persia became eternal enemies.
Yeah. The Romans considered everyone barbarous, like barbarians outside the empire, like the Germanic tribes, the Britons, the Celts, even the Dacians at some point, the Sarmatians, so on and so forth. But the only civilized state alongside them was obviously China, but most notably it was Persia. It was Persia because it was the rival. It was the only empire who could contend with them.
Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else.
Okay.
We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution,
Iberian Reconquista. Okay, that's crazy. I really want to watch that.
And Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible.
Kings and
The
Generals,
question of why
you
the
guys are
Roman
amazing.
frontier stopped where it did has been asked by many prior historians. The most well
Yeah, we have literally, okay, for some reason, okay, I'm not sure. Wasn't it called Gallia or something? Or Gallia is in Greek? Was it called Gaul in Latin? Because we have Noricum, Illyricum. It doesn't say Illyria, it just says Illyricum. Then we have Dacia, Moesia, Macedonia, Asia, Pontus. I think that's called Pontica, maybe. Syria, and this is Egypt. It should be Egyptus, honestly.
Known of these works belonged to Edward Luttwak, who saw the frontier as the failure of the Roman regime's ideology and grand strategy. Luttwak's view is now heavily dated, having been first contested by historians John Mann and later by C.R. Whitaker. To understand why Rome's frontier with Parthian Persia and later Sasanian Persia ended where it did, it is necessary to explain what a frontier meant to the Romans in the first place.
Yeah, it meant like literally either like the boundaries of the empire, and then after the boundaries just like uncivilized barbarians. But the boundaries were mostly geographic, like the mountains or like rivers, for example the Danube or the Rhine river, you know. And this in this case is the Euphrates river.
When depicted on modern maps, the borders of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent look solidly defined. However, the modern concept of a border as a strict boundary between states effectively did not exist as a concept in the ancient world.
Definitely not.
To the Romans, there were merely limits to their control or authority.
Yep.
The limites, or limits, which today define the Roman frontier, were not hard lines, but
And fun fact, limites then comes to the the title of limitani, who in later Roman period were the border troops, basically.
zones of control that unified a region where multiple cultures met and interacted. The Romans had no scientific concept of a border, or why they ended a border where they did. Part of this was due to the fact that the Romans simply lacked accurate information.
Yep.
For example, while the ancient commenters Appian and Strabo both claimed that England was not worth the expense of conquest, as it had little economic value, the Romans conquered it anyway and found it to be rich in minerals. The Roman senator Velleius Paterculus claimed that Emperor Tiberius thought the Elbe was 400 miles from the Rhine, when it was a mere 200 to 250 miles, and this was his knowledge from after his campaign in the region was over. Hard geographic or cultural borders were lacking both in reality and conceptually.
Yeah.
Roman fortresses and markets were built on both sides of the Rhine and Danube.
Yep.
Strabo
That's
mentions
true.
Roman client rulers outside of Rome's borders,
Yep,
and
yep, yep, yep.
Procopius mentions Roman landowners and workers who regularly crossed between Roman and
And the client kings basically were a way to assert authority and influence beyond the borders without, sending significant troops to that side, significant, politicians, significant governance, significant resources, because the resources at the time were very scarce, you know. For example, the only exception to that was Dacia, which was heavily Romanized.
Sasanian control. Long frontiers, such as Africa and the Levant, featured significant distances between the forward walls and posts that controlled trade and the actual military frontier. The lines of fortifications were primarily for defending roads, rather than delineating the limit of Roman power. Why
Yeah,
then
because
did
without roads, then the Senate, like the body of Rome, was just Italia. There's no other. They cannot control the whole empire if their connections are severed, aka the roads.
the Romans stop where they did? Luttwak posited that the borders existed because they represented the milestone at which the grand imperial ambitions of the Roman state began failing, due to political and military turbulence within the empire. This view ultimately failed to consider the numerous other factors that contributed to the halt in Rome's territorial expansion,
Yeah.
as well as the fundamental logistical, geographical, and economic challenges faced by the empire.
A really good animation, honestly. I really love this. Kings and Generals, I think it's the best one which does this. Alongside maybe Epic History or like Knowledge, you know?
These were the arguments posited by historian C.R. Whitaker, who asserted that fundamentally Rome's border with Persia reached an equilibrium in which the empire was large enough to prosper and project power without antagonizing the intersecting peoples that made up this zone. This zone, therefore, also defined the geography and environment.
Yep, this zone specifically, like the Euphrates region, as you guys see, like we have here Osronie, then we have Ediaben, like those states over here, those are client kingdoms of both of the empires. The only client kingdom here we have is Commagene, basically, of the Romans. And then those are the client kingdoms of the Persians. Of course, Armenia switched hands between the Romans and the Persians multiple times, much like how the they will switch hands between the Muslims and the Romans again in the future, centuries later. Then we have Lazica, a long-standing client kingdom as well. Iberia as well, being switched between Persians and Romans. And then, of course, Albania mostly being sticking with the Persians. You know?
In which it could exist, only as far from the core as the economic and logistical engine could sustain.
Yeah.
In the world of Roman frontier studies, this is known as the periphery, divided into the inner and outer frontiers.
Yep.
This inner frontier was the point at which the empire could reliably supply and operate an army and its administration within the limits of the local population's tolerance. In contrast, the outer frontier was the wider operating range in which the empire could assert its political and military power, but whose presence would not be tolerated in the long term.
Yeah.
Thus, the stabilization of the Roman frontier begins to make sense in this context.
Of course.
Roman naval power made supporting the movement of armies along the Mediterranean coast relatively simple,
Yeah,
due to
way
the stark
faster.
contrast between the rapidity and costs of overland and seaborne logistics. Rome's major campaigns into Gaul, Germania, and Spain could all be supported by supply routes upstream, along rivers like the Rhone or the Elbe, with dredging, widening, and canal projects frequently attested.
Drusus Canal from the Rhine to Lacus Flevo, the modern Zuiderzee, is the prime example of the Romans' willingness to engage in mega engineering due to their reliance on riverine logistics for military operations. Yeah, the Romans were crazy in terms of logistics and building and fortifications.
Maintain such logistical chains. However, many regions lack traversable rivers, particularly in the East Mediterranean. This presents a twofold problem, as the geography limits Rome's ability both to conquer and to extract resources or economic value from the region. In this sector, as well as in Armenia, the Romans secured the fealty of local rulers, utilizing native client kings to assert their power over the region, without the intolerable and unsustainable presence of an army in a distant or isolated region. The Romans and the client polity established a series of political, social, and economic relationships, albeit thus forming part of the outer frontier or periphery. Gradual integration was facilitated by these relationships, which enabled Rome to expand its frontier and establish direct administrative control as local political conditions evolved in their favor over time.
Yep, exactly. Look at this like a Judea, you know? Like before Judea was incorporated into the Roman state, it was a client kingdom state first and foremost, right? That's why we have if you're familiar with the Bible, you know, we have Pilate, I think his name was, I think, yeah, he was a governor there in Judea, and he basically was controlling Judea in the name of the Romans, but there were few Roman troops there, you know, basically. Like it was basically an independent state, but they had to pay tribute. They had to, you know, stuff like that. They had to send manpower to Rome, and eventually they got assimilated into the Roman polity.
The trade-off was that the process of assimilation was indirect and took much longer than direct military conquest.
Yep.
The progress that Rome made in maintaining its soft power over these client states was hindered only by the emergence of powerful rivals in the region, such as the Pontic.
Yes, Mithridates was really a pain in the butt for the Romans.
Empire of King Mithridates, which challenged Rome's political control over the Near East during the late Republic. At its zenith, Roman influence extended far deeper into the east than is reflected in the Roman-Persia border pictured by many modern maps. At the height of their power, the Roman emperors had a policy of interfering in succession and internal affairs in not just Armenia, but also in Parthia itself.
Yep.
In many ways, effectively all of Armenia, the Caucasus, and West Parthia could have been considered part of Rome's periphery. And Parthia,
yeah, multiple times, especially. And also, Syria multiple times could have been considered a periphery as well, because Antioch has been sacked multiple times by the Persians.
Was even occasionally viewed as a client kingdom of Rome.
Yep.
Their governments therefore sought to justify this relationship with the royal Arshakid dynasty of Persia providing hostages to be raised by the Julio-Claudians, as if they were royal foster parents, and the Romans using those hostages to claim imperial dominance over all of Parthia, even enthroning several as Shahanshah, or the Persian King of Kings.
Yep.
Conversely, the Parthians also utilized a similar series of relationships with client kingdoms based on the earlier Seleucid model of governance. They relied on the Tigris and Euphrates to assert their authority over the western parts of their empire.
Yep.
The problem was the geographic reality of communication lag, which made extending control through the client relationship impermanent.
Yeah, because you have to consider all of this, all of those regions over here, they're full of mountains. Like all of Armenia, basically over here, is full of mountains. Now we have the Zagros Mountains. I'm pretty sure it's called Zagros Mountains over here, which hinders communications between Iraq and modern day Iran, basically. So yeah.
Logistically, the Tigris and Euphrates were very easy to traverse up to the first cataracts,
Yep.
much like the Nile River. This made campaigning along these rivers the logical choice, combined with an abundant local agricultural supply for keeping an army afield. Where the rapids prevented the advance of logistical vessels further upriver, Parthia's influence waned. The same can be said for Rome, which had to rely on overland routes into the Armenian plateau when it ventured away from the riverine corridor of Mesopotamia. This is the region where we find small client states, such as Osroene, Edessa, Komagene, Corduene, Sophene, and Adiabene, in which both Rome and Parthia interfered in local dynastic politics, or attempted to shift loyalties. Thus, the border arrived at a natural equilibrium, where the spheres of influence of these two polities met, which often maintained flexible arrangements that enabled the kinds of descriptions of this border we find in the writings of ancient authors, such as Strabo and Procopius. This raises another question. Why was Trajan's campaign different? In 114 AD,
because Trajanus was a different beast, honestly. Trajanus, you could say, he was the best Roman emperor. You could argue between him and Vasilios Defteros, which in English means Basil II. You could argue between Basil II or Trajanus in terms of military tactics, in terms of military competence, in terms of like how you manage the empire. But I will give it ultimately to Trajanus, even though he had it way easier for him to manage an empire at the time, considering the position Basil was. But you get what I'm saying. Trajanus was a different beast. He was great in administrative policies, in diplomatic policies, in military policies, with his conquest of Dacia and the conquest of Mesopotamia, obviously. And he was just a great man overall. Like, he knew his place, he knew his reach, he knew his authority, and he exploited that. He took advantage of that, and that's why he got the nickname of Optimus Maximus, or Optimus Principus Optimus. I forgot. Hold on. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, I butchered it. It's Optimus Princeps, basically. Yeah, Optimus Princeps. Really, really cool title, honestly. I wish it's kept around like Augustus or Kaiser, but you can't have it. And yes, he's the only one which is worth having this title, honestly. Optimus Princeps, basically. That's crazy, honestly. That's crazy. Okay, let's go. Continue.
Emperor Trajan led Roman armies deeper into Persia than they had ever gone before, ultimately capturing the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon and possibly reaching the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, the closest Roman emperor coming as close as Trajan in terms of getting their armies that deep into Mesopotamia was Mauritius. Emperor Mauritius in the late 500s, under the Emperor of Tiberius II, I'm pretty sure.
The Roman historian Cassius Dio attributes Trajan's motivations to a desire for prestige and legacy.
Oh yeah, I forgot also Heraclius as well. Heraclius, the goat, also reached that far too.
One hypothesis suggested by 20th century historians was the desire to gain access to the trade routes to East Asia, as the
most Far East trade in this period is thought to have been seaborne into Aegyptus and the Hormuz rather than overland through the Iranian plateau, although overland exchange certainly existed.
Primary motive for conquest. But this has been broadly rejected by modern ancient economic historians. There is little evidence for firm Parthian control over the eastern trade routes, often collectively termed the Silk Road. And Roman sources do not provide any evidence of a defined economic policy towards trade with the Far East. Another hypothesis espoused by modern historians is that Roman policy towards Parthia in the 2nd century revolved around establishing a new defensive line along the Khabur River, which would then secure the client kingdoms within the Roman sphere of influence, such as Armenia, from Parthian influence.
Yep.
These historians point towards the ambitions of Palmyra and its close ties with Karakini, and the relationship of the Romans with the Arab peoples, who controlled both sides of the Euphrates, as evidence for this political vision for the region.
Yep, that's true. And we see that during Justinian's period, he managed to build even a fortress named Dara, honestly. And then later, during Mauritius period, he managed to conquer Armenia, like half of Armenia, like around this side, honestly, which was pretty impressive. That was the height of Roman control against Persia, honestly.
Ultimately, Trajan was unable to overpower or sway every ruler necessary to permanently extend the frontier.
Yeah, look at those juicy borders, bro. But it's, yeah, realistically they couldn't have kept all of those all of those territories long term. Hadrianus made a good choice to retreat rather than keep the territories and then get his, ass kicked by the Parthians and lose a bunch of troops,
Polities like Hatra, Elymais, and Atropatene remained opposed to Roman occupation.
Yeah.
The overstretching of the Roman periphery is evident in the revolts that led to the abrupt end of Trajan's campaign, as Roman garrisons in Mesopotamia were ejected from the cities, and populations in Syria and the Levant began to rise up in opposition to the economic burden placed upon them.
Yep. Yeah.
The economic reality of conquest also limited both powers' ability to meaningfully campaign deep into either state's territory.
Yeah.
While we have excellent figures on the size and costs of Roman campaigns, which were hideously expensive, data on the Parthian Empire and its economy is comparatively limited.
Yeah.
The size and geographic span of the Parthian Empire, throughout its rivalry with Rome, was broadly similar to that of the Hellenistic Seleucid state prior, from which they drew many of their governing and economic institutions. Historian Michael J. Taylor estimates the revenues of the Seleucid state at approximately 50 to 60 million bronze drachmae at its apex, which would likely be comparable to Parthian revenues.
Yeah, because if you don't know, the Republican, like mid-Republican era Rome, and again late, converging to the late Republican era, managed to fight off the Seleucids, honestly. Sometimes they lost, sometimes they win, So yeah.
However, the state's expenditures were evidently quite high. Roman sources suggest that the Parthians could field large armies of anywhere from 10 to 50,000 men, which on the upper end is comparable to Antiochus III's force at Magnesia, an army for which Taylor estimates the total campaign expenditures at around 100 to 125% of the Seleucids' revenue.
Damn. Yeah.
Of this, he estimates that food and logistics cost around 10 million drachmae, supplied by a fleet that required approximately 15 million drachmae to maintain.
Yeah, super
expensive.
expensive.
The Parthians fundamentally lacked in the Mediterranean. The point of this number is to show the difficulty of campaigning deep into territory that was technically within or near to the territory of Antiochus's own polity, much less the problems and expenses associated with campaigning deep into a foreign polity. Extracting and maintaining a standing army in the region was also challenging for the Seleucids and Parthians.
Yeah.
The forces required to occupy a region consumed a significant portion of their total revenues, as evidenced by the number needed to subdue Caucasian Albania under Vologases I. Finally, while the decentralized organization of the Parthian realm made it resilient, it also limited its ability to increase direct administrative control over much of its periphery. And
like, of course, there are like advantages and disadvantages to both centralized and decentralized governments,
Large-scale offensive campaigns further west into Roman territory. In contrast to the Parthians, who were certainly formidable as a political and economic power, the Romans had an economic engine that vastly outclassed any other neighboring polity, except for their far-off peers in Han China.
Yep.
Masters of logistics, the Romans would spend months or even years preparing for a major incursion into enemy territory, as seen, for example, in the lead-up to Trajan's campaign, where logistical preparations for the operation had already begun 3 years in advance and encompassed all of Anatolia in the effort. The Tigris and the Euphrates enabled the Romans to campaign downstream.
In ancient times, the Syrian coastal Nur and southeastern Taurus mountains were known as the Amanus Mountains. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, then.
provided they could transport supplies over the Nur and southeastern Taurus mountains to the river plains beyond. Riverine access, combined with the Parthians' choice of capital at Ctesiphon on the Tigris, made this corridor the logical choice to campaign against their foe, but it would not result in the Parthians' conquest. The problem was that taking the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon fundamentally did not cripple the power of the Parthian Empire. Unlike Alexander's campaigns against their Achaemenid Persian predecessors, the Parthians were not decisively defeated in multiple set-piece battles to
Spoilers, we still haven't finished the Alexander series. Yeah, but no worries, I already know everything, but
their
still.
legitimacy by Trajan or his successor, Emperor Lucius Verus.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the Parthian administration was much more decentralized, able to fall back on its other seats of power at Nisa and Hecatompylos.
Exactly, yeah.
Foraying deeper into Persia would also involve moving supplies through the passes of the Zagros Mountains into the central Iranian plateau, a much more daunting affair than campaigning into the Armenian highlands.
Not only that, but you also have to consider that if you go there without a proper logistics in mind, proper strategy in mind, then your army would get decimated, like Darius's army. It was decimated by the Alexander's army. So yeah.
This was beyond even the Romans' considerable logistical capability.
Yep.
And much like Alexander's army beforehand, Trajan's armies would have been left starved of water or would have frozen to death along the mountain passes.
Yep.
Finally, neither Trajan nor Verus had either circumstantial or systemic politics within their opponent's polity working in their favor across the rest of their periphery, unlike with Darius III and Alexander.
Obviously, because Darius III and Alexander were literal monarchs, you know. At this time, especially during the Principate era, the title of Augustus was an office. It was not just what you call it, a primogenial succession in the one family, you know.
Rome would never succeed in achieving such a sweeping conquest, but ultimately did manage to significantly expand its frontier further into Parthian territory after a second campaign and sacking of Ctesiphon under Lucius Verus.
Damn, I didn't know that.
With a new frontier at Nisibis and Dura Europos, Roman influence had shifted the equilibrium further east, likely enabled by the rise in power of Palmyra and its political allies.
Interesting.
Whether or not this contributed to the destabilization of Arshakid rule and the eventual collapse of the Parthians is impossible to say based on the available sources. Still, the influence of Palmyra and Karakini in the Civil War, combined with the Roman annexation of Osroene and parts of Armenia, weakened the position of Parthian King Vologases VI and created an opening for Ardashia's rise in the ensuing civil war.
Damn.
Ultimately, this division created an opportunity for the Sassanid dynasty to centralize the government and build a more effective governing apparatus, as many of the client kingdoms were permanently subsumed into an administrative and logistical backbone that allowed them to push back against the Roman frontier that had shifted eastwards, enabling a campaign that reached over the Nur mountains to sack Antioch in 253.
Damn, how many times did Antioch get sacked? Bro, we need to like make like a competition. Who got sacked more, Antioch or Ctesiphon?
602 to 628 saw the even more organized and centralized Sasanian polity able to exploit Roman civil war and push through the frontier into the Roman core as far as Egypt and Anatolia. However,
oh my gosh, and this all happened during the early 600s, honestly. Actually, mid 600s. Because after the Battle of Antioch in 613, during the reign of Heraclius, the Sassanians managed to conquer all of the Levant, all of Egypt, and assert the dominance of Armenia. And then they managed to send an expedition towards even Constantinople itself.
Their control over any of these regions in this period was tenuous at best. The expansion of the periphery into the Mediterranean destabilized the Sasanian house and allowed internal politics to restore the previous equilibrium, at least until the emergence of the nascent Islamic Caliphate some decades later. The question, therefore, is, given the economics, logistics, and military resources, could the Roman Empire have conquered Persia? The answer to that is yes. Of course it could have. If you give one side all of the advantages necessary to do it, then the thought experiment becomes pointless, because it would happen.
Basically, honestly, it all depends on leadership and how much that leadership has authority over their own empire. Because Alexander's authority was 100% honestly. Like, sure, there were a few rebellions here and there, but then again, he managed to quell them. And his diplomatic skill was also incredible, having managed to gain the title of Pharaoh, being crowned Pharaoh in Memphis, after the conquest of Egypt. So you have to you have to have a Rome, a state of Rome, who has an Augustus, which has complete authority over the whole state, and you have to have the opposing side, which in this case is going to be the Sassanids. Let's say Heraclius basically had everyone backing him, and his leadership was absolute, and he managed to also, let's say, fend off the Avar somehow. Then she definitely could have conquered the Persians. It's just that um, he couldn't have, because the logistics, he didn't have the logistics, he didn't have the manpower, he didn't have the economy. uh she just needed like an army. She could have replicated the Alexander's conquest, but he didn't have the army. She just had like a one small army.
That enabled the Parthians and Romans to defeat each other and shift the balance of power rarely had anything to do with battles and victories, but rather everything to do with the political, economic, and societal circumstances surrounding the campaigns. Rome and Persia were therefore eternal enemies, not because they could not defeat each other, but because that equilibrium was the natural solution for the geography, economy, and people of the frontier. More videos on the geopolitics of the ancient world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, comment.
Thank you very much, Chings and Generals. Thank you so much. And yeah, I guess I could give a bit of afterthoughts. Okay, so my thoughts on this. Very, very good video. I really, really enjoyed it, honestly. I love the art. I love the visuals. I really love the narration. This guy who's narrating, peak, 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 peak. Thank you so much. And about the unwinnable war, about the last thing he said. Um, I honestly think if Rome has a leader like an Alexander figure, then they definitely could have conquered Persia. Obviously, they needed to have their resources, their economy, their administration at its peak. They shouldn't. You cannot give, like, let's say, a good leader to a state which is like on the verge of collapse by the caliphates, by the Avars, by the Lombards. You know what I'm saying, right? So yeah. Same thing with Persia. Like, if you give a figure like, let's say, I don't know, Darius the First or Xerxes, then they definitely could have conquered the Roman Empire, honestly. So yeah, I honestly think that at some point, if the caliphates didn't exist, another power would rise and conquer them, honestly, because they both did not conquer each other based on their leadership, because the leadership was average, honestly, at this point. So yeah. Anyways, this was it. I hope you guys liked it. My name is Jackie, and yeah, keep in mind the OG video is in the pinned comment. Go check it out, and give me your feedback and your opinion on my reactions, the video, and I hope you have a great day. My name is Jackie, and I'll see you guys next time.